Welcome back to the Let's Talk Universal podcast, a place dedicated to talking about hot workforce and workplace topics. And today I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Sara Kedge, DEI design thinking strategist and neurodiversity coach. Well, hello, Sara, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, I'm so pleased to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you, and I can't wait to talk to you more about neurodiversity and the work that you're doing. You're doing so much, and I'm looking forward to speaking about that. But to begin with, can you just tell our audience who you are and a little bit about your background?
Okay. So as you say, my name's Sara Kedge. I live in North Norfolk. I have 5 chickens, 5 cats, and a bright yellow Land Rover. So if you see someone in a bright yellow Land Rover, it's probably me. My background is I'm profoundly dyspraxic and ADHD, and what many of the ADHD listeners might resonate with is my background is quite long and complicated. I've had quite a few jobs. The core theme throughout all of the jobs that I've had, whether it was my first profession as a hairdresser and master barber, working as a probation officer, working in business strategy, is it's working with people and businesses to help them to either earn more money, live the life they want, make the changes that they want to in their life. So I have quite a long and complicated history, but that's what I do, and that's where my life has sort of got to.
Yeah, and so when it comes to the neurodiversity piece and the experience of neurodivergent people in the workplace, what kind of things do you think is important for organizations to understand? I suppose there are varying needs from different kind of people on this kind of spectrum of neurodiversity. So what kinds of things do you think organizations, aren't aware of, the kinds of things and experiences that neurodivergent people have?
So the first thing to say is that in every business is the antidote to discrimination. It's already in the business. So when, although I go into businesses and I'll talk about this, but actually you already have the antidote to this. You already have the knowledge that you need in your business to remove hostility and difficulties and barriers for neurodivergent people in the workplace. You already have it. You might not be leveraging it, but it's already there. What you need to know is that around 1 in 10 people are neurodivergent, but around only half of those people know it. So whether you like it or not, you've already got neurodivergent people in your workplace, and they're struggling because the way that we design many businesses is that it's process driven rather than human driven. So if I use the example of recruitment is designed as a process, advert, application, interview, offer. But what it doesn't take into account is that you're trying to attract humans, and you're trying to attract the right type of human into a job. But when you focus your desire for the right human in the job on the process, what you tend to do is you tend to attract people who are good at processes and form filling. What you have the opportunity to do is to flip this over and ask yourself, if we continue with the recruitment as an example, what type of people am I looking for? What are the barriers in the current way that we're doing things that will be presented for those people? And then how do I remove them? So, for example, a dyslexic person is somebody who struggles with written language. So when you're asking for applications you might be wanting the skills and knowledge of that person, or dyslexic people tend to have very creative brains. They tend to be very divergent thinking naturally. So you might want that in your business. But by asking them to fill in quite a long, complicated application form and or providing a CV, you're creating an unintended barrier to getting that bright and ideal person into your business. So by asking yourself, okay, so who is it I want in the business? What are the barriers that how we're doing it created for those people? And how do I remove those barriers? So it might be, and there are some organizations that start doing things like video interviews or video applications, which automatically removes the need for either a dysgraphic person or a dyslexic person who struggle with reading and writing it removes that barrier. So you might automatically attract a more the right person into your business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and I think there are some organizations that are kind of in that space of, oh, we don't do anything at the moment, but as you say, there are probably already some things that are happening and already exist within the organization, but there are just perhaps some extra things to consider.
Mm.
I guess my question to you is, when it comes to more specific cases, I know that you personally are learning, sign language. That's quite a specialized skill that a lot of organizations, they can't, well, not can't, but they don't necessarily have the resources for people who perhaps need, sign language as a way of communicating. So yeah, I don't know, why is it that you're learning sign language to begin with? Because I think that's something really interesting that the audience might want to know.
So I've always wanted to learn sign language because it interests me. I'm quite an expressive person, so it interests me. What's happening in recent years is a number of particularly autistic people are starting to use sign-supported English, which is a form of sign language. So when they have difficulty verbalizing, so they might be non-verbal or have limited verbal capabilities, they still have the capacity to communicate using sign. So for me, I work with a lot of autistic people. I work with lots of people with varying disabilities. So it sort of naturally, it's like, actually, if I learn this piece of language, then I can communicate with people in a very different way. And going to your point around businesses not having the resources to invest, and I often get this when I'm delivering training in workplaces, this inclusion bit is all well and good and it's nice, but it's really expensive. And my question to them is, what's the cost to your business of building in hostility for the people in your workplace? Because it's expensive to recruit new people, not just the physical, putting the adverts out and the downtime for doing the interview, but it's expensive because every time a person leaves your business, they're taking knowledge away with them. Every time you bring a new person into the business, you have downtime until that person gets up to speed. So as much as it feels like an expense, if you get somebody with the right knowledge, skills, experiences, and drive into your business, it's less expensive to provide some reasonable adjustments than it is to recruit a new person. And quite frankly, quite a lot of reasonable adjustments are free. All they take is a willingness from the line manager and the employee to have a conversation about what the barriers are to the employee performing at their best and how they might remove them. And actually, sometimes it's really simple stuff like providing a 15-minute window in between appointments. So for some neurodivergent people who find transition from one topic or activity to another, a specific window so that they can decompress from the previous meeting, recollect their thoughts and move into their next meeting. That doesn't actually cost anything. It might cost a little bit of time, but again, we're coming back into that. What's the cost of not doing this? Things such as making sure that when you're doing calendar invites, that you're putting reminders into the calendar invite, you're putting an agenda into the calendar invite, you're making sure that the Zoom link is in the calendar invites. They're all free things that won't just help neurodivergent people, but it will make everybody else's life easier. So I think for me, there's this tension around, it's expensive to be inclusive. Actually, the cost to not being inclusive is arguably bigger than doing the investment to make a workplace work for the humans inside it.
Yes, absolutely. I love the sentiment that, even though you're perhaps catering for a group of people, actually the benefits benefit everyone within the larger organization. And it's so that the idea that good businesses or good business practices, I can't speak today, good business practices are inclusive. I know that's something that you've said before. So how achievable do you think, I know that you've said that there are things that can be done on a day-to-day basis, but is that achievable for organizations to see the change happen quickly, or is this kind of an ongoing process that they need to invest in? You know, even just those smaller kind of line manager things.
If you get me onto line management, we'll be here all week. My top and bottom of line management, for the last 20 years, the investment in line management training has plummeted. It's one of those pieces of training and professional development that seems to be dispensable. And what you have now is, because we have 15 to 20 years of people moving into line management roles that aren't given the skills, knowledge, and experience or support to effectively work with people and get the best out of them. So what you have is you've got these generations of people who are doing their absolute best, but who would really benefit from being supported to know how to do it well. And this is the thing with investing in line management, because you can do the strategy, and that's really important, that inclusion is owned at the top of the organization. You have it's embedded within your strategy, and that it's fed through the organization. The people that are really going to affect cultural change on a grand scale in your business are the people managers. They are the people who are supporting your employees to make the change in the world that you want to see. And that's whether you're making microphones or you are a farmer and you're working with potatoes. The people managers are the ones who are leading the culture and shaping the culture in your organization. So to train people on how to, I talk about a needs economy, as fundamentally all a line manager is making sure that their employees have the right skills, tools, experience, and support to perform at their best. And it's there's a skill in knowing how to do that and how to get the best out of your people. So to be able to train people to confidently have a conversation around what your employees need to perform at their optimum, and to have a negotiation, a conversation on how they can provide that, is a recipe for success. It's a recipe for improving your bottom line. So I come back to this investment in inclusion is heavy. Investment in good business practice, because what inclusion is solid, good business practices, means that it will improve your bottom line. It will increase your retention of employees, your performance levels will go up, and you will have happier employees. To me, it feels like a no-brainer.
Yeah, no, it's the business case, I think, for neurodiversity is becoming more and more apparent as more reports from companies like IBM and Ernst and Young are kind of coming out and kind of highlighting the business case. But why do you think neurodiversity has become such a big thing over recent years? I mean, it's not something that's necessarily new. Like, the concept of neurodiversity has been around for a couple of decades, but why is it that you think now is why we're seeing this push towards neurodiversity and neuroinclusion?
Okay. So the earliest records of people talking about neurodiversity in medical records is in the 1700s. And it's the first references that have been found talking about ADHD people. So this is by far not a new concept. And there's some research that came out of Cambridge University from the anthropology faculty, looking at how neurodivergent brains and neurodivergent traits have always been around. They're really useful to humans in the history of survival. You're talking about your ADHD brains. We tend to be people who can have a hyper focus, be really concentrating on one activity and only for a short period of time. So that hyper focus is really useful in hunting scenarios. It's not really as useful when you're trying to store seeds or you are trying to create patterns or understand patterns. But that's where your autistic humans come in. So it's not a new thing. In the 1990s, there were two people, I'm not going to get into the political argument of who said it first, two people in the 90s started talking about the word of neurodivergence. And that's where we started, it kind of started to come into the common parlance. More recently, I think what happened was, and I think this is a real, there's a combination of things, both the pandemic and social media videos. So with the pandemic, so what happens with neurodivergent people is we we when we are born, we sort of try and work out how to behave in the world. And what we are given is we are constantly given requests to modify. And what that is, and what it looked like when I was a child, is my parents and my teachers who said, calm down, Sara. Will you pay attention, Sara? Will you stop dropping things and knocking things over, Sara? Will you just concentrate? And what these did, and they were given with love, because they were from people who wanted me to do well, but they were messages to my brain and to myself that actually how I behave naturally in the world isn't okay. So I created a mask and a persona and to behave in a way that was acceptable. And we, as neurodivergent people, we do this throughout our lives. We pick up these requests to modify, going, oh, it's not okay for me to have curious attention. I must maintain eye contact. I must do things in a certain way. And that creates enormous amounts of intellectual, emotional, and physical heavy lifting on a daily basis, which is exhausting. So when we went into the pandemic, we didn't need to go out into the world and into workplaces and put on our neurotypical masks. Neurotypical is the language that we use for people who are not autistic, dyslexic, dysgraphic, ADHD, Tourette's, or has an acquired neurodivergence. So we didn't have to put the mask on. So we could sit at home and actually be how was comfortable for us. And at that point, people were starting to ask the questions on going, okay, so if I was really uncomfortable there and I'm really uncomfortable with these behaviours, what's that about? And this comes into the videos from social media, is that it's provided access to people to have language and understand that the traits and the way that they are naturally and most comfortably have identity traits and they have language attached to them. So I think it was a combination of those two things that really propelled people into going, hang on a second, there are things in how I behave in the world, how I interact with the world, how I process information. Oh, hang on a second, there are other people who have these experiences. They identify themselves as being ADHD, dyslexic, autistic, and so on. So I think those are the things that are pushing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think everyone's seen the videos on TikTok or on Facebook from people who are, being vocal about their experiences, and I think there's definitely a positive thing to all of that. But in terms of the workplace, why do you think organizations are having such problems or challenges with neuro inclusion in their workplace? Because we've seen and had conversations with some organizations where they're saying, yes, we understand this, and we really want to make it work, but we're just not seeing the success. Why do you think that is?
I think the reason for that is because when I come to an organization who has these comments, what normally happens is we've given them drag and read write software and they've not excelled. We've given them a stand sit desk and all of a sudden they are not ideal. And that's almost an organization that's trying to fix a very complex people solution with very simple technological answers. And they can be part of the solution, but actually, when you're working with a neurodivergent person, our experience in the workplace is that if we disclose our diagnoses or identities, we often get sidelined, we often get made redundant quite quickly after, or we lose our jobs. And this is research is backed up by research, and there's some research that came out last year that was indicated that autistic people in particular, 80% of autistic people are either unemployed or underemployed for their skills, knowledge, and experience levels. So it's not safe for us often to explain what exactly is going on for us and what's difficult for us. And when we do, we often are faced with, this comes back to the line management conversation, we're often faced with a line manager who hasn't been given the support or the tools, so doesn't have the skill to have an authentic, honest and helpful conversation with that employee. So you've got this problem of employees that don't feel safe and line managers who don't have the skills and knowledge. So you're dyslexic, have some read write software. I've read somewhere this is what will make you better. And actually, it's not about making people better. What it is about removing barriers to them performing well. And that requires an honest and a courageous conversation both ways. Because sometimes, again, we put our masks on as neurodivergent people. We might not be aware that we're actually masking. We might not be aware that not everybody does the workarounds that we do. So they might not even know that they're struggling. They might not know what would really help them. So when I work with organisations, and I often work with people, neurodivergent people and their line manager to facilitate a conversation, to hold experiments around, okay, so you're a person who struggles to get to meetings on time. What's the cause of that? What's the root of that? And even for one ADHD person, it could be time blindness. It could be not being able to organise themselves. It could be they were on their way to a meeting, they got distracted by something. So it's not a one done thing. So it is. So going back to your earlier point, is inclusion something is an end destination? No, I'm afraid not. What it is it's an ongoing investment of a business in supporting their employees to perform at their best. It's not a one and done thing. It's not something that can be easily solved by a bit of drag and software. But what it is it's shifting the conversation from we must have you to perform at this level, and if not, you're out, to a needs economy, which, and I won't talk about neurodiversity, and I often describe myself as being a bit of a Trojan horse. I go in talking about neurodiversity. What I actually talk about is creating humanity and needs that are met within the workplace. And that works for neurodivergent people, it works for LGBTQ plus people, it works for all people. Even people that have as privileged an identity as you can find, they still have needs. So if you can support your line managers to have honest needs-based conversations and to respond to those needs, you get people who are happy, motivated, skilled, knowledgeable, and who want to be in your workplace.
So when you speak with organisations, initially, that first conversation, is it usually around, oh, we want to do more around neurodiversity, or is there a different problem that they come to you with? Which is it?
There are both. There are two things. Both are true. So there is the organisation, and these tend to be because neurodivergent people tend to gravitate towards certain industries. So STEM, for example, STEM and creative industries tend to have a greater proportion of neurodivergent people. So when I have a tech company or a science-based company come to me, they often go, look, we know we've got a bunch of people whose brains function differently. How do we get better at this? And I love these conversations because they are organizations who recognize that amongst the challenges, the people they've got in their businesses are also exceptional people, and they are skilled and they're knowledgeable, and they're going to contribute to the business achieving whatever goal it is. And I love those conversations. The other conversation is, hi, Sara. We've got this neurodivergent person and they're just about to go on to a performance management. But because we know they're neurodivergent, we want to make sure that we're doing things right. And I don't mind that conversation. There is an honesty in that. But that conversation it gets to the point of, actually, we've got to the point of this being a real problem where we're thinking about moving this employee out of an organisation. It's almost protective rather than proactive. And for those organisations, the starting point is supporting the neurodivergent employee to be able to communicate what's not okay for them, what are the barriers to them performing, and then having the conversation with the line manager around, okay, so these are the needs, this is what will support that person to perform, and having that negotiation around what's reasonable and achievable in that workplace. So both are true. And I don't mind either conversation, because quite often if you're reaching out to somebody, you're aware that there is a learning need. And quite often with the second organisation, the conversation then goes, okay, so the conversation goes into, how do we support our managers to support our people better? how do we raise awareness throughout the whole organisation of neurodivergence? But you're right, there are two ways that people come to me.
That's really interesting, and it seems that there's definitely two different kind of phases, at least there, of where an organization's at with their awareness and understanding of neurodiversity, but also I think potentially as well understanding it as a business imperative, and much like, you know, with diversity and inclusion overall, I think that there is we're beginning to see that connection now between these kind of what used to be feel good fluffy topics, and then the business outcomes that organizations are wanting to see.
Yeah, and actually for me, it is the right thing to do. Diversity and inclusion is the right thing to do. I want to live in a world where everybody has opportunity and for barriers to be removed to realise the potential that they have in themselves. That's my moral objective. That is this. When we go into business spaces, if we flip that over back into what's the point of a business? And the point of a business is to get the right resources, whether they be people, knowledge, products, or raw materials, into the business, attracted to and into the business. You want to move it through the business by adding value and out the back door to a customer. That's what a business is fundamentally. And it doesn't matter whether you're a florist or you are a mechanic or you are somebody who works in tech and you're coding. Same principles apply. All inclusion is removing frictions and barriers to the smooth movement through into the front door, through the business and out the back door. That's all business is. And if we think about some of the more traditional ways of doing continuous improvement, whether you're talking about Kanban, you're talking about Six Sigma, you're talking about lean improvement, that's all this is. It's removing frictions and barriers to the right people, goods and services coming into the business, moving through the business with adding value and out the back door. So it's a business argument. Mm-hmm. You're removing friction, tension and blockages to you earning money and creating the change in the world you want to see, whatever that is.
So for organizations who are perhaps at the beginning of this journey, so they're listening to this and they're saying, okay, that's brilliant. I love the philosophy of this. What would you suggest to those organizations if they haven't currently got any kind of neuro inclusion program in their workplace? What would your first steps be for them in terms of going on this journey?
The first step is I run my core programs, the ABC of ND. It's a 90-minute workshop. It's a foundation to understanding. So your first point is raise awareness, because people, once they're interested, they will often then go, oh, okay, that's really interesting. Or, I have an autistic employee. I now understand it a bit better. I can go and have a different conversation with my person. So that was my starting point. I think I would then look at where your biggest challenge points are. If you are service-based industry, or you have quite a lot of line managers, I would go into that. If you are somebody who is a product-based in business, I would start by looking at your customer journey. So, for example, if I was selling, I don't know, jewelry on my, and I was a platform that was selling jewelry, I would start looking at your customer journey through a neurodivergent lens. And this is the support that I give organizations, because this is the expertise I'll bring into the business. Is okay. So you want to sell lots of jewelry. Let's have a look at your client or your customer journey and see what barriers you're inadvertently creating in that journey and how we can remove them. Because at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to sell more jewelry than the next person. Does that make sense? I think the final thing is to really acknowledge that it doesn't matter. I've been doing this work for 20 years and I'm still learning. There is so much I still don't know. So even if you're at the start of this journey, fabulous. Acknowledge you at the start of your journey and work from there. Find somebody who will take you from where you are to the next little bit on the journey. You will never get to the end of the inclusion journey because there will always be something else. Personally, I'm doing quite a lot of work for myself on decolonizing my practice, raising my awareness of the impacts of colonization, and that's the piece of work that I'm doing at the moment. And I've been doing this work for 20 years, so I'm still doing the learning journey. The important thing is for you to keep moving. The important thing is for you to acknowledge the things you don't know, to invest time and effort to go and understand, and to then put them into the action. And this is one of the things that when I talk about allyship to some people and some businesses, you almost see the visible eye roll, because allyship is something that's been bandied about, and sort of there was a lot about it a few years ago. But all allyship is acknowledging that you have privilege. We all have some privileges, and that you will have spots in your knowledge and your awareness that will create unintended barriers to other people in our world, and whether that's in our business environment or our personal one. The act of allyship is acknowledging it, learning about it, and then doing something to remove that barrier, even if I'm not in the room. Does that make sense? So my starting point was raise awareness. Secondly, look at the biggest crunch point in your business, which is if you're a service-based industry, who are your line managers. If you're a product-based business, look at your client journey. That would be my starting point.
That makes perfect sense. And I think that will resonate with a lot of people, because I think for a lot of business leaders out there, particularly D&I, there's a struggle to break out of it's just kind of an internal people issue, and actually no, this goes beyond and into your customer experience and your branding, and it's a much wider diversity and equity and inclusion,
and one of the things
kind of experience.
One of the things that I and again I can be quite unpopular. I say unpopular things. But in the DEI space, we tend to attract people who are incredibly passionate, this is a good thing, about inclusion. But what the DEI practitioners often lack are some core business skills. And when I say that, I mean the ability to translate the inclusion activities into language that will get buy-in from the strategic leadership. They struggle to translate the activities they're suggesting into business improvement outcomes. And fundamentally, this is what as any business is going to want to do good in the world. Most businesses don't want to do active harm, but actually it's translating the language and the impact that inclusion work does into business improvement. And I think there's a real need to shift us as a cohort of professionals to be able to do that work, and then to be able to project manage it clearly, and then to be able to provide that evidence basis on, we did this activity and that this is what the outcome was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you actually, because at the event where I met you, actually, I asked you a question about performance, and I think it was measurement of kind of diversity and equity and inclusion, or neurodiversity. I wanted to ask you again, so what you thought about the kind of the measurement piece,
Erica,
because I was quite interested by your answer. So do you mind kind of explaining what you think organizations should be measuring versus what they currently are measuring?
Most organizations are not measuring neurodivergence. They will generally, if we're lucky, capture age, gender, though many organizations still have a binary gender of male, female, and there's a need for people to sort of become more nuanced in gender identities. They often have race and ethnicity. So a starting point is to understand who you've got in your business. and to recognize that when I'm a queer human being, when I started out my professional life, I've always been out, I've always been proud. And in the first couple of businesses I worked in, I was like the only person who was queer in the business. And I'm like, well, that's not statistically possible. So there needs to be recognition that even though people aren't diagnosing or identifying themselves as having a protected characteristic or an identity, doesn't mean you don't have these humans in your business. But your core starting point is to start collecting data. However, there is real problems with that because of self-identification and the fear around, if I do put my head above the parapet, what's going to happen to me? So they're faulty mechanisms. The same goes for employee surveys. There's a mistrust in employee surveys and staff questionnaires around who's going to look at them. So you don't always get a really good sense of what's going on. But you have to start somewhere. And the conversation Erica and I had about this was actually all data is really difficult, and you have to be very careful about what you're measuring. Because if you're measuring output, say we're creating widgets and actually the measurement of success is 50 widgets a month in yellow, that's a measurement. However, it's understanding that that's limited, and when you put any kind of target in, people work to the target. And this is I did some time in the NHS. I worked for an improvement program for NHS improvement. And what we see is throughout the NHS, accident and emergency is a good example of this. They have a front door to either discharging the person or moving to another place in the hospital, and they have a 3-hour target. And that's what people were working to, because you gave people a target, and they were measured on success on that target. That doesn't necessarily improve the quality of care. It doesn't necessarily improve the quality of decision making. What it does is it makes people focus on getting people from the front door to whichever back door that they need to get to. Does that make sense? So when you're talking about business improvement metrics, be really careful, because concentrating on getting 50 widgets out of the door within a month, it's a metric. But if you focus yourself on that metric alone, what are the unintended consequences of focusing on that metric? From a D&I perspective, it's not legal in the United Kingdom to have positive discrimination or recruiting people to specific demographics. And I agree with this, because what you do then is if you look at your organisation demographic and say, actually, the UK population is 1 in 10 people are neurodivergent. We only have 1 in 3 we only have 3% neurodivergence. Sorry, no, that's the wrong statistic. We only have 1 in 3 rather than 1 in 10 are neurodivergent. We need to go and recruit some more neurodivergent people. It would result in you trying to attract more neurodivergent people. And are you getting the right skills, knowledge, and experience into your business for a start? Because those neurodivergent people may be wonderful humans. They might not be the best human to get into those jobs. The next thing, if you force people into an organisation, and what we've seen with other identities where there have been proactive recruitment and targeted recruitment, is you move neurodivergent people into a business that's actively hostile to them, that doesn't respond to their needs and doesn't set them up to good performance. So you attract neurodivergent people into your business, you plop them into a way of working that doesn't work for them, you don't support them, and then they either leave of their own accord, they go off sick, or you end up moving them out yourselves. So metrics are useful, and they can be useful, but you have to be really careful about how you structure what you're measuring to make sure there aren't unintended consequences for you, the business, and the people that you've got working in your environment.
See, I knew that was worth asking you that question, because there was a lot to come out of that, and I enjoyed the sentiment that that just because you're doing your best to attract neurodivergent talent, it probably doesn't make much of a difference if they're just going to leave 6 months down the line because you don't have those pieces in place to actually incorporate them.
Yeah. And this comes back to the first point I was making. This is a business decision. This is business activity. This is making sure that we've talked about recruitment, and actually inclusion should feed through that the whole organization. So procurement is an area that is often missed and forgotten about. But actually, if you are an organisation or a business that you sign up to either the United Nations SDGs, you do one of the ISOs, or you're trying to be a B Corp, or you just have a statement saying we want to be diverse and inclusive. My question is to your procurement department: what metrics, rules, measures, requirements are you putting in place for your suppliers to also have those shared values and shared activities? And if I just talk about maybe learning and development departments, large organisations buy people like myself into their business. Fabulous. I've not yet been asked to talk about how I'm inclusive, how I'm contributing to environmental sustainability, how I am removing barriers to people. But actually, when I look at the business website, it says we are working to do this. So it's looking at all corners of your business and looking at ways that you can put inclusion as standard into how we do things around here. And this is where it's an ongoing journey, because how we do things around here will need to change. As we understand more about neurodivergence, we will need to shift our business processes. And this comes back to the stuff that I was saying earlier about businesses are often process driven rather than people driven. We try and move people through processes rather than asking the question, how do we support our people to get the outcomes that we're looking for? And if I talk about neurodivergence specifically with neurodivergent people have fluctuating attention. We expect, as a neurotypical business design, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, half an hour lunch. We expect people to hold their attention throughout that whole period. Actually, a neurodivergent, an ADHD person has hyper focus for short periods of time. So they will be able to whack out a big lump of work and then their brains will be done. So it makes no sense that we set up our business system for people to have Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, when their energy and attention may not work like that. They may not be optimum until 11 o'clock in the morning. They may work best at 4 o'clock in the morning. So there's this conversation with their employees. When do you work best? How do you work best? How do we get the most out of you, the best out of you? How do we support you to perform at your absolute optimum? With things like expenses, and expenses for me, massively dyspraxic. And for anybody who doesn't know, it's also known as developmental coordination disorder. So I'm very clumsy. My brain doesn't tell my body where it is in relation to the built environment. One of the sub-identifying factors of dyspraxia is the ability to process information. So I'm quite a clever human, but if you give me an expenses form, one of my previous employers did, I had an Excel spreadsheet that I had to then copy the information from the spreadsheet onto a PDF, and then I had to upload the receipts and had to cross-reference it across. Was never going to happen. It never did happen. So there was a system that was built that meant that I was set up to fail. But there were alternatives. There are alternative solutions. There are always alternative solutions. We might not have thought about them, but there are alternatives. So it's setting people up and setting our business systems up that support people to do well and supporting our people to perform at their best.
So, Sara, thank you so much for answering my questions today. I could literally talk to you for hours about this. But I just wanted to quickly talk about the podcast that you've just started, because it's a great opportunity for you to kind of mention the work that you're doing around that. What is it? Why did you decide to start one?
Oh my days! There are two things I want to talk about now, and you've given me a license to talk about things. So, yeah, it's the Neurodiversity Business
Yeah.
Podcast. I talk on there about neurodivergent identities, the challenges that people have with neurodivergence, and this is one of the things I have a problem with most people, many people in the social media land, is that the majority of stuff is talking about the challenges of neurodivergence. And I talk on the podcast about things that you can do to improve the quality of your own life. I talk about the tools and techniques that you can use to improve your own business practices, your own line management. And I have a bunch of amazing guests who are neurodivergent or who work at senior levels in businesses, and they will come and talk about the things that they do to promote neurodiversity inclusion. It's fabulous. I'm loving it. Am I able to talk about the book?
Good. Yeah.
Can I talk about the book?
Absolutely. Let's talk about the book.
So very quickly, because I'm aware, oh my days, look at how long we've talked for. I do talk a little bit. This is one of the things
I know, it goes quick.
it's one of those things about your neurodivergent people. You know, there's a love language thing. Neurotypical people have, acts of service, words of affirmation, blah, 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 blah. Neurodivergent people have their own love language, and one of those is info dumping. So if I like you, I'll info dump. You find a subject that I like, and I will tell you all the things. One of the other,
Yeah, my brother's this.
I will info dump. If I like you, I'll info dump with you, or I'll find a pebble and I go, look, there's a pebble I found. I like it, and here you can have it. Anyway, one of the other things I've been doing for the last 4 years is I run a neurodivergent entrepreneurs community. And it was set up to help people like myself to set up, grow, and scale businesses that are designed in alignment with how they work. Because what we often see is that neurodivergent people will burn out from working in corporate environments or business environments because they're not built for how we work. And so people often go, actually, I'm going to set up my own thing. Brilliant. The problem is the majority of stuff out in the world talking about entrepreneurship is built on the model of business that burnt them out in the first place. So you've got these wonderful humans are going, I want to do something differently. They then go and look for a way to do something differently, and all they find is more of the same. So my colleague G. Sabine Roberts and I have written the Neurodivergent Guide to Entrepreneurship, where we write a different way of doing things. We talk about how you can structure your business in a way that creates a life you don't want to escape from, where you can build systems and processes and structures that means you can make money and have a life you love. And that came out, that was released on the 19th of February.
So, Sara, yes. Thank you for that. And for anyone who would like to access either the podcast or the books, we'll be providing the links on our website at theuwi.com/podcast, where they'll also find this episode. But it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you get up to this year. I know you've got a busy schedule this year, but for now, thank you so much for sharing your insights and perspectives with us all today. It's been wonderful.
You're really welcome. Take care.